John Rambo wasn't supposed to be a superhero. He wasn't supposed to be a cartoon or a Funko Pop or an icon of a right-wing power fantasy. He was supposed to be a tragedy. When First Blood dropped in 1982, it wasn't some meathead shoot-'em-up. It was a bruised, bitter little film about a man in America who had been chewed up and spit out by the system. A former Green Beret left drifting in the wake of a war the country wanted to forget, and was haunted by the memories it will never let him process. The cops in that movie weren't just the antagonists, they were stand-ins for a society that treated Vietnam veterans like they were radioactive, like they were dangerous, like they were disposable. John Rambo was a shell of a man with a survival knife and a bad case of what they used to call battle fatigue. Today, well, we'd call it PTSD. Back then, they called it being a time bomb. But somewhere along the way, the time bomb became a brand. Hell, 3 years later, First Blood Part 2 kicked in the cinematic door with explosive arrows, a bandana, and a body count written by James Cameron, and it made over $300 million worldwide. Overnight, Rambo went from a warning sign to a Cold War action figure, and it helped redefine American masculinity on the big screen. And with that, the soul of the original film got sucked out and replaced with muscles, machine guns, and jingoism. My God, the jingoism. It even got more surreal in Rambo 3, where he literally teams up with Mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan. Footage that, given what's happened in the recent 30 years or so, they don't exactly want to dust off for the History Channel anymore. Then, of course, came the 2008 revival, a grim, gory return to form, at least tonally, and let's be fair, the movie was excellent, and I mean excellente. It was great. I love it. But then, in 2019 came Last Blood, which I enjoyed, but it did feel like a confused attempt to cross Home Alone with Sicario, minus the nuance. And now here we are. John Rambo. A prequel, quite frankly, nobody's asked for, from a studio that doesn't seem to understand or care what made the original special. Millennium Media, who's held the rights since 2005, are very much trying to milk this IP for whatever is left in the goddamn tank. And the plan, apparently, is to turn Rambo into an origin story action spectacle set in Vietnam with a young actor playing a pre-First Blood John Rambo. Never mind that we already know what happened to him there. Never mind that the whole point of the original story was about the after. This isn't about storytelling. This is about franchising. This is IP necromancy. The whole thing reeks of that modern Hollywood desperation to spin every character into a cinematic universe. But Rambo doesn't need a universe. He was the universe. A self-contained scream into the void about what happens when a country trains its soldiers to kill and then forgets them when they come home. The idea that you can slap a Marvel origin treatment onto a character like Rambo and pretend it's respectful, well, that's pretty goddamn laughable. And it gets even worse when you look at who's been playing around with the character lately. Take Rambo First Kill. It's a graphic novel launched on Indiegogo and co-written by Chuck Dixon and Will Jordan. They've handled some of the stories within it, but Will Jordan is most importantly known on YouTube as the Critical Drinker. Yeah, that guy. Anyway, I digress. Dixon is a very conservative comic book writer. He's a veteran of the industry. He's also a culture warrior just like Will Jordan. And these guys have made a brand out of yelling at clouds, or in the case of Jordan and Critical Drinker, women in Star Wars, women in Marvel, women in movies, women in comics, women in TV. I mean, my God, if a woman is anywhere near him, the man has an aneurysm. But here's where it gets crazier. Sylvester Stallone even co-wrote this story. That's right, the man who was Rambo helped pen a version of his own origin that feels more like fan service for grievance junkies than anything with emotional weight. I mean, there's a reason none of this has been mentioned in the Millennium's press release for John Rambo at a con. And it has everything to do with the rights and the fact that they own them and Sylvester Stallone does not. Millennium, they want the IP, but they don't want the baggage. They want the myth, but they don't want the message. And maybe that's why this whole thing just kind of stinks. It's not about it being just a bad idea, because it is. It's about erasing the parts of cinema that used to challenge us. First Blood did not, under any circumstances, glorify war. It didn't treat veterans like action figures. It was a critique. It had something to say. It made you uncomfortable. And it did it at a time when no one wanted to talk about Vietnam, let alone feel sympathy for the men we left behind. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, April 30th, 1975, the fall of Saigon, a perfect time to reflect, to reconsider, and to maybe, I don't know, tell a real effing story about trauma and disillusionment. But no. Hollywood's answer is a glossy, retooled prequel where Rambo probably gets his knife from a wise old colonel and delivers quippy one-liners while mowing down CGI enemies in slow motion. Probably set to maybe a synth score, although I'm going to go on a limb and say it's the 70s, it's Vietnam. They'll probably spring for maybe CCR's rights. Now, this movie will most likely also be test screened into oblivion because, God forbid, a movie make you feel something uncomfortable anymore. I mean, if you strip away the spectacle and the nostalgia, Rambo isn't a hero. He's a man who is broken by a system that never cared about him in the first place. A man who begged not to be pushed, who fell apart on the floor of a police station crying for a friend who died in an aimless war. This is not a franchise. It's a warning. So no, John Rambo as a movie isn't just a bad idea. It's literally a betrayal. A betrayal of the character, of the story, of the history. And for what? Another IP to feed into the streaming void, another movie to reboot 5 years later when the prequel flops and some exec decides that the real money was in a gritty reboot all along? But John Rambo deserved better than to become a mascot for the macho nonsense. He deserved to be remembered the way he was introduced, bleeding, hunted, and alone, not because he was a monster, but because nobody cared enough to ask him what made him that way. And in a country, in a society that says we honor our troops, we honor our servicemen and women, I don't know, this kind of feels like a huge ass slap in the face. But my name is Matt. What are your thoughts? Let me know.